My sister lifted her champagne glass and thanked me for making her dream wedding possible, while I stood there knowing something wasn't right. Why had the costs doubled without warning? Why were there payments I didn't recognize? And why was my accountant standing at the back of the room holding a folder I'd never seen before? Vanessa smiled like everything was perfect. Like I hadn't asked questions she refused to answer. Then Daniel stepped forward. Before anyone toasts this marriage, he said, opening the file, we need to talk about where the money actually went. If you're watching from somewhere, tell me where you are and what time it is there. And if stories like this hit close to home, you might want to stick around and subscribe. 6 months earlier, I was sitting at my kitchen counter in Chicago, halfway through reviewing a client's quarterly report, when Vanessa called. She didn't text first. She didn't ask if I was free. She just FaceTimed me, smiling so wide I already knew something big had happened. "I'm engaged," she said, holding her hand up to the camera before I could even say hello. The ring was large, not subtle. The kind of ring that doesn't just signal commitment, it signals expectation. "That's... wow," I said, setting my laptop aside. "Vanessa, that's amazing. Congratulations." Behind her, I could see Mom and Dad moving around in the kitchen at home in San Diego. There was already a bottle of champagne open. "We're celebrating tonight," Mom called out. "You should have been here, Lillian." "I just found out," I said, trying to smile. Vanessa leaned closer to the camera. "We're thinking late summer. Napa, maybe. Something elegant, not over the top, but still special." "Special usually costs something," I said lightly. She laughed, but it wasn't the kind that invites you in. It was the kind that moves past you. "We'll figure it out," she said. "That's not the point right now. It became the point 3 days later." We were all on another call this time planned. Dad had a legal pad in front of him like he was running a meeting. Mom looked excited already, talking about flowers and guest lists. Vanessa had a spreadsheet open, though I noticed most of the cells were still blank. So Dad said, clearing his throat, "We've been looking at venues." Vanessa turned her screen toward the camera. Photos of vineyard chandeliers, long tables under string lights. "It's beautiful," I said. "What's the range?" Vanessa hesitated just long enough for me to notice. "Well, depending on what we choose, somewhere between 50 and 75,000, I asked. She nodded like it was obvious. I leaned back in my chair. "That's not a range, Vanessa. That's a commitment." "It's a wedding," Mom said gently. "Not just any event." "I understand that," I said. "I'm just asking how you're planning to cover it." There was a pause. A quiet, coordinated pause. Vanessa looked down, then back up at me. "I mean, Ethan and I will contribute what we can." "What does that mean?" "It means we're figuring it out," she said a little sharper this time. Dad stepped in. "Lillian, you know your sister hasn't had the same opportunities you've had. I felt that land exactly the way it was meant to." "I didn't have opportunities," I said calmly. "I built a career, and we're proud of that," Mom added quickly. "But family supports each other." There it was. Not a request. Not even a question. A direction. Vanessa's voice softened. "I wouldn't ask if it didn't matter. This is the one thing I really want to do right." I studied her face on the screen. She wasn't lying, but she wasn't telling the whole truth either. "What's your actual budget?" I asked. "Not the venue photos, the real number." She clicked around her spreadsheet. "We're still filling it in." "Then fill it in," I said, "before you commit to anything." Her smile tightened. "You always do this. Do what turn everything into a transaction." "No," I said. "I turn things into numbers. Because numbers don't shift depending on who's asking. Dad sighed. This isn't a boardroom, Lillian. No, I said. It's exactly where people make decisions that affect them long term. Vanessa closed her laptop halfway. I didn't call to be audited, and I didn't offer to be your bank, I replied. The silence that followed was heavier than anything said before it. Mom was the first to break. Sweetheart, your sister just wants a wedding she won't regret. You're in a position to help. Why wouldn't you? Because help without structure becomes expectation. Because expectation becomes entitlement. But I didn't say that. Instead, I asked, if I contribute, I need full transparency. Every contract, every invoice, every payment. Nothing gets approved without documentation. Vanessa looked at Dad, then at Mom, then back at me. That's a lot, she said. It's standard, I replied. If I'm covering a significant portion, I need to see where the money is going. She exhaled slowly. Fine. If that's what it takes. It wasn't agreement. It was concession. And there's a difference. Okay, I said. Then I'll help. Mom smiled immediately. Dad relaxed back in his chair. Vanessa nodded, but she didn't look relieved. She looked like she'd just accepted terms she planned to work around. We ended the call shortly after that. I went back to my laptop, but I didn't reopen the report. Instead, I sat there thinking about the way Vanessa had avoided specifics, the way Dad had framed it as obligation, the way Mom had turned it into emotion, and the way I had still said yes. 2 weeks later, the first invoice came in. It was for a venue deposit in Napa, clean, professional, detailed, exactly what I expected. The second one wasn't. It was labeled event services, but there was no vendor name, just a routing number and an amount $8,500. I called Vanessa. What is this for? It's part of the planning package, she said quickly. From who Chloe the planner. There's no company listed. It's her personal business account. She explained it. She didn't explain it to me. There was a pause. You said you trusted me, Vanessa replied. I said I needed transparency. You're getting it. No, I said quietly. I'm getting numbers without context. Her tone changed. Not louder, just colder, Lillian. If every single charge turns into an interrogation, this is going to be exhausting. I looked at the invoice again, then at the date, then at the account number. Something about it didn't sit right. I'm not interrogating, I said. I'm verifying. Same thing she replied. We hung up a minute later. I didn't approve the payment right away. Instead, I opened a new file on my desktop and labeled it Wedding Expenses. Then I added the first invoice and the second. I told myself it was just organization, just structure. But as I stared at that second payment, $8,500, no vendor, no contract, I felt something shift. Not suspicion, not yet. Just a quiet awareness that I might not be looking at a wedding budget. I might be looking at something else, and I didn't know how big it was going to get. The first time I met Chloe Harris, she arrived 20 minutes late and didn't apologize. She walked into the tasting room in Los Angeles like she owned it, tailored blazer, oversized sunglasses still on indoors, phone pressed between her ear and shoulder as she finished a call. Move the installation to Friday. No, not Saturday. Friday, she said, then finally looked at me. You must be Lillian. She ended the call without waiting for a response and offered a quick smile. I've heard a lot about you, she added. I wondered what version of me she'd been told. Vanessa hugged her like they'd known each other for years. Chloe is incredible. She's done 3 weddings at this venue alone. That explains the pricing, I said. Chloe smiled again, this time more measured. Quality tends to do that. We sat down. Menus were handed out. The coordinator started explaining the tasting sequence, but Chloe cut in halfway through. We'll need to upgrade the dessert table, she said, flipping through her tablet. The standard option doesn't photograph well. Vanessa nodded immediately. Yes, definitely. I hadn't even seen the standard option yet. How much is the upgrade, I asked. Chloe didn't look up. About 4,000? For dessert? For presentation, she corrected. I glanced at Vanessa. Do you want it? She didn't hesitate. Of course. Then we should see a breakdown, I said. Chloe finally met my eyes. We'll include it in the final invoice. I'd prefer it before approval. There was a beat. Not long, but enough. Sure, she said. We can do that. But she didn't. That became a pattern. Over the next few weeks, every meeting followed the same rhythm. Vanessa would agree to something quickly: floral installations, lighting rigs, live musicians, custom invitations. Chloe would confirm it. And then later an invoice would appear that didn't quite match what had been discussed. Sometimes it was small, a few $100s more. Sometimes it wasn't. One afternoon, I was going through a batch of invoices when I noticed 2 charges for premium linen upgrade. Same description, same date. Different amounts. I emailed Chloe. Can you clarify why there are 2 separate linen charges? She responded an hour later. One is for the ceremony, one is for the reception. That wasn't specified, I wrote back. Can you provide the contracts for both? No response. I followed up the next morning. Still nothing. When I brought it up during our next meeting, Chloe waved it off. I'll have my assistant send everything over, she said. She never did. Vanessa shifted in her seat. Lillian, it's just linens. It's not just linens, I said. It's duplicated billing without documentation. Chloe's smile tightened. Nothing is duplicated. You're just seeing different components. Then label them differently, I replied. Vanessa exhaled, clearly annoyed now. Do we really need to go through every line like this? If I'm paying for it, yes. The tension lingered, but the meeting moved on. That night, I sat at my desk with all the invoices open on 2 screens. I started organizing them not just by category, but by date amount and vendor. Patterns started to emerge. Charges that clustered around certain days. Payments that didn't align with meeting timelines. And then there were the transfers. They didn't look like vendor payments. No company names. No invoices attached. Just routing numbers and amounts. $5,000. $3,200, $12,000. That last one caught my attention again. I pulled up the transaction details. The receiving account wasn't listed under any vendor we'd worked with. No business registration tied to it. No invoice reference. Just a name. E. Cole. I stared at it for a long time. Ethan Cole. Vanessa's fiancé. I checked the date. 3 days after we finalized the catering contract. I opened the catering invoice. It had already been paid in full through a completely different account. So what was this $12,000 for? I called Vanessa. She picked up on the second ring. Hey, I'm in the middle of something. Can this wait? It's quick, I said. There's a transfer to Ethan's account. $12,000. What is that? There was a pause. A reimbursement, she said. For what? For expenses he covered earlier. What expenses? Before you got involved. That's not how reimbursements work, I said. There should be documentation. You're overthinking it. No, I said calmly. I'm asking for a paper trail. She exhaled sharply. Lillian, not everything needs to be formalized. When it's my money, it does. Another pause. Then softer. Why are you doing this? Doing what? Turning this into something it's not. I looked back at the screen, at the numbers, at the name. I don't know what it is yet, I said. That's the problem. Silence. Then she said, I'll send you something later. She hung up before I could respond. She didn't send anything. The next morning, I emailed Chloe again. No reply. By the afternoon, I stopped waiting. Instead, I opened a new folder inside my file. I labeled it Unverified Transfers, and I moved the $12,000 transaction into it, then the $5,000 transaction, then the $3,200 transaction. By the time I was done, there were 7 entries, 7 payments that didn't belong to any vendor, any contract, or any part of a wedding I could identify. I leaned back in my chair and stared at the list. It wasn't just disorganization. It wasn't miscommunication. It was a system. I didn't know the full picture yet, but I knew enough to stop treating this like a planning issue. This wasn't about flowers or linens or dessert tables, and whatever it actually was, it was already bigger than the wedding. I didn't sleep much that night. Not because of the money itself, I've worked with numbers long enough to separate emotion from data, but because of the pattern. Patterns don't happen by accident. They repeat. They reveal intent. By morning, I had already forwarded every invoice transfer and note I'd collected to Daniel. He called me before I finished my first cup of coffee. I went through what you sent, he said, his voice steady in that way that meant he was choosing his words carefully. How involved do you want me to get? As involved as necessary, I replied. I need to understand what I'm looking at. There was a pause, papers shuffling on his end. Okay, he said. Let's start simple. Some of these invoices, especially from this planner, don't follow standard formatting. Missing tax IDs, inconsistent billing descriptions. That's not automatically fraud, but it's not clean. I noticed that I said. But this part, he continued. The transfers to personal accounts. That's different. I pulled up the same file on my screen. Ethan's account. Yes. And not just his. There are 2 others. 2 others. Names tied to personal checking accounts, not registered vendors. I ran quick checks, no business filings under those names in California. I felt my shoulders tighten. So they're not legitimate vendors. Not in any formal sense, he said. At best, informal services. At worst. He didn't finish the sentence. Say it. At worst, it's a way to move money without documentation. I stared at the spreadsheet. The numbers didn't feel abstract anymore. Walk me through it, I said. Explain it like I'm a client. Daniel didn't hesitate. If someone wanted to inflate a budget or redirect funds, they could create vague line items, event services, logistics, things that sound real but aren't specific. Then instead of paying actual vendors, they transfer funds to personal accounts under the assumption that no one's going to question it too closely. And if someone does, they delay. They deflect. They say paperwork is coming. I let that sit for a second. That's exactly what's been happening, I figured, he said quietly. I clicked into one of the duplicated invoices. What about these? The linens, the lighting. Same descriptions, different amounts. That's called padding, Daniel said. increasing costs incrementally so it doesn't look obvious at first glance. Individually, each charge feels reasonable. Together, they add up. How much are we talking about? I'm still calculating, he said. But based on what you sent, a significant portion of the total. Significant portion. I leaned back in my chair. Define significant. Give me another hour and I'll give you a number. We hung up and I sat there staring at my screen. Part of me wanted to close the file and pretend this was all a misunderstanding, that there was an explanation I just hadn't heard yet. Something simple. But numbers don't wait for explanations. They sit there, consistent, unmoving. An hour later, Daniel sent me a document. Subject line preliminary analysis. I opened it slowly. The first page was a summary total amount paid so far categorized by vendor service type and transfer. Then there was a column labeled unverified. I scrolled down. $5,000 unverified. $3,200 unverified, $12,000 unverified, $4,500 unverified, $6,800 unverified, $2,900 unverified, $7,600 unverified. At the bottom, a total, $42,000. I read it twice, then a third time. $42,000 that couldn't be tied to any legitimate vendor contract or documented service. Almost more than half of what had been spent so far. My phone buzzed. Daniel again. I didn't want to just send that without context, he said. So let me be clear, this isn't sloppy bookkeeping. I know, I said quietly. This is structured movement of funds. The timing, the amounts, the repetition, it's intentional. Are you sure? Yes. I closed my eyes for a second. Then say it plainly, I said. What am I dealing with? Another pause. Shorter this time. You're dealing with someone who is using your money for something other than what you agreed to fund. The words didn't feel dramatic. They felt precise. Could it still be related to the wedding somehow, I asked? If it is, he said there would be documentation, contracts, receipts, something. Right now there's nothing. I turned back to the spreadsheet. 42,000. That's before the final payments, I said. Correct. And the total budget is pushing 75. Also correct, which meant if the pattern continued, I didn't finish the thought. Do you want me to dig deeper? Daniel asked. I can pull more records, trace the accounts further. It'll take time, but we can build a complete picture. I looked at the date on my calendar. The wedding was 3 weeks away. If I confronted Vanessa now, she'd shut everything down, deny it, redirect, maybe even cut me out entirely. And then I'd never see where the rest of the money was going. No, I said slowly. Not yet. You sure I need her to keep moving like nothing's wrong? I said. If this is intentional, she'll keep following the same pattern, and you'll have more data. Yes. Daniel exhaled softly. All right. But Lillian, be careful. Once people realize they're being watched, they change behavior. I know. We ended the call and I sat there for a long moment. $42,000. Not missing. Not lost. Moved. I opened my folder again and created a new tab. Timeline. I started mapping every transaction against every meeting, every conversation, every decision Vanessa had made. Dates lined up in ways I hadn't noticed before. Payments right after disagreements. Transfers right after I asked questions. It wasn't random. It was reactive. Which meant she knew exactly when I was paying attention and when I wasn't. My phone buzzed again, this time a message from Vanessa. "Hey, can you approve the florist upgrade? We're on a deadline. No explanation, no invoice attached. Just a number in the message. $6,800. I looked at the spreadsheet, then at the message, then back at the total Daniel had sent me, $42,000. And counting. I typed back slowly, "Send me the contract and full breakdown." 3 dots appeared, then disappeared, then appeared again. Finally, her reply came through. "You're making this harder than it needs to be." I stared at the screen, feeling something settle into place. Not anger, not even disappointment. Clarity. Because for the first time since this started, I wasn't guessing anymore. I was watching. And she didn't know it yet. I didn't answer Vanessa right away. Instead, I closed my laptop and let the silence sit for a while. Not because I needed time to think, but because I needed to decide how I was going to show up from that point forward. There's a difference between reacting and positioning. By the time I reopened my screen, I already knew which one I was choosing. I replied with one line, "Send the documentation and I'll review it today." No emotion, no argument, just process. She didn't respond. Not that afternoon. Not that evening. The next morning, I had 3 missed calls from Mom. I called her back while walking into my office. "Lillian, what's going on?" she asked immediately. No greeting. "I'm working," I said. "What do you mean?" "Your sister is upset. She said you're refusing to approve things last minute. I'm asking for documentation. She said you're questioning everything." "I am," I said calmly, "because I'm paying for everything." There was a pause, then a shift in tone. "Sweetheart," Mom said softly, "this is her wedding, not a business deal. It became a financial arrangement the moment I agreed to fund it. That's not how family works." I stopped walking. "It is when the numbers reach this scale." Another pause. Longer this time. "She's under a lot of stress," Mom continued. "Planning expectations, everyone watching. The least you can do is make it easier." I leaned against the wall outside my office. "I'm not making it harder," I said. "I'm making it accountable." Mom exhaled like I'd missed the point entirely. "You've always been like this," she said. "Everything has to be structured, controlled. Vanessa is different. I know she is. Then meet her where she is." I thought about the spreadsheet, the transfers, the silence when I asked for details. "I have been," I said quietly, "for 6 months." Mom didn't respond to that. Instead, she said, "Your father thinks you're turning this into something it doesn't need to be." "Of course he did." "I'm turning it into something I can understand," I replied. "Well, right now," she said, her voice tightening, "what we understand is that your sister feels unsupported." Unsupported. The word landed heavier than I expected. Not because it was true, but because it was familiar. "I've transferred over $50,000 so far," I said. "If that reads as unsupported, I don't know what definition we're using." "That's not what she means," Mom said quickly. "She means emotionally." There it was. Money wasn't the point anymore. Emotion was. And emotion doesn't require receipts. "I'll call her," I said. "Please do." Mom replied, relief slipping into her voice. "Just don't make this bigger than it needs to be." We hung up. I stood there for a moment, then went into my office and closed the door. I didn't call Vanessa immediately. I opened the spreadsheet first. 42,000 unverified, 53,000 total spent, and a new request for $6,800 with no documentation. Then I dialed her number. She answered on the 3rd ring. What she said, not even pretending to be neutral. "Let's talk about the florist," I said. "We already did." "No, you told me the number. You didn't explain it. It's a last-minute upgrade." "From what to what?" Silence. "Then better arrangements." "That's not a breakdown." Her tone sharpened. "Why are you doing this now? The wedding is in 2 weeks. Because that's when the final payments happen." "And you think I'm just making things up," she snapped. "I think I don't have enough information to approve this." "You never have enough information," she said. "That's the problem." "No," I replied. "The problem is that the information doesn't exist." That landed. I could hear it in the way she didn't respond right away. "You don't trust me," she said finally. "This isn't about trust. It always is." "No," I said, keeping my voice even. "Trust doesn't replace documentation. It works alongside it." She laughed once, short and sharp. "You really don't get it, do you?" "Then explain it to me." Another pause. Then quieter. "This isn't just about a wedding. This is about me not looking like I failed." I didn't say anything. "I have people coming," she continued. "Friends. Ethan's family. His colleagues. Do you know what they expect?" "I know what appearances cost," I said. "That's why I asked for a budget." "You asked for control," she corrected. "I asked for clarity. And what if clarity ruins things?" She shot back. "What if knowing every number makes it all feel smaller?" I looked at the spreadsheet again. "Then maybe it is smaller," I said. That was the wrong answer. I heard it the second the words left my mouth. Her breathing changed. "You've always thought you were better than me," she said quietly. "That's not true." "It is," she insisted. "You just hide it behind spreadsheets and calm voices. That's not what this is." "Then what is it?" she demanded. I could have said everything I knew about the transfers, about Ethan's account, about the pattern. But I didn't. Not yet. Instead, I said, "Send me the contract for the florist. That's all I'm asking right now." There was a long silence. Long enough that I thought she might hang up. Then she said, "Fine," and ended the call. I waited. An hour passed, then 2. By the end of the day, a document appeared in my inbox. Subject: florist contract. I opened it immediately. It looked legitimate at first glance. Logo: itemized services. Total amount $6,800. But as I read through it, something felt off. The formatting was inconsistent. The contact information didn't match the company website, and the signature at the bottom, it wasn't digital. It was scanned. I zoomed in. The edges were slightly blurred, like it had been copied from somewhere else. I opened a new tab and searched for the florist's official business records. The registered address didn't match the one on the contract. Different suite number. Different phone. I called the number listed on the official site. A woman answered. "Hi," I said. "I'm calling to confirm a contract under the name Vanessa Torres." There was a brief pause as she checked. "I'm sorry," she said. "We don't have any contracts under that name." I thanked her and hung up. Then I went back to the document, to the logo, to the signature, to the amount. $6,800. Not for flowers, for something else. Something hidden inside something that looked real. I added the file to my folder. Unverified. And for the first time since this started, I stopped wondering if I was overreacting, because now I had something concrete. Not a pattern, not a suspicion. A document that didn't hold up under a simple phone call. I leaned back in my chair, feeling the shift settle fully into place. This wasn't miscommunication. It wasn't stress. It wasn't even denial. It was fabrication. And if one contract was fake, I didn't need Daniel to tell me what that meant for the rest. I didn't call Vanessa back. Not after the florist. Not after confirming the contract didn't exist. Instead, I forwarded the document to Daniel with a single note. Verified with vendor. They have no record of this. He replied 10 minutes later. Give me 2 hours. I didn't ask what he was going to do. I already knew. When Daniel works, he doesn't chase explanations. He reconstructs reality. By the time he called, I had already started pulling more files, older invoices, emails, anything that could anchor a timeline. Okay, he said when I picked up. We need to be precise from here on out. I agree. The florist contract is fabricated, he continued. Logo pulled from the real company, but the formatting and registration details don't match. The signature is a scanned overlay, so it's fake. Yes, not sloppy fake. Intentional fake. I closed my eyes briefly. Hearing it out loud didn't shock me anymore. It clarified things. What about the other vendors, I asked. I started spot checking, he said. 2 more inconsistencies already. 1 lighting company that doesn't exist, and a catering add-on billed under a different entity than the actual caterer. How much? For those 2, around 11,000. I leaned back in my chair. Add that to the 42. Which brings us past 50, he said. More than 2/3 of what had been spent so far. And the transfers I asked. I traced the receiving accounts, he said. Ethan's is confirmed. The other 2 are linked to individuals, not businesses. No vendor licenses, no tax filings. So all of it roots back to personal accounts. Yes. I stared at the spreadsheet now covered in notes and highlights. Daniel, I said, if I let this continue, will the pattern hold? There was a pause. Based on what I'm seeing, yes, he said. Whoever set this up is consistent. They're not improvising. They're following a structure. Then I need that structure intact. You're thinking of letting it run. I'm thinking of documenting it completely. Another pause. Longer this time. That means you don't confront yet, he said. No. And you keep approving payments. Selective ones, I corrected, the ones that fit the pattern, so you can prove intent. Yes, he exhaled quietly. That's not without risk. I know. If they escalate, the amounts could increase. They already have. And if they realize you're tracking this, they'll stop. I finished. Which is why they can't realize. Silence. Then, all right, he said. If we're doing this, we do it clean. I'll build a full audit trail. Every transaction, every document, every inconsistency. We'll map it so anyone can understand it without a finance background. That's exactly what I need. And Lillian. Yes. Once this is complete, you'll have options. Legal ones. I let that sit. I'm not there yet, I said. Just making sure you know. We ended the call and I looked at the screen again. The numbers didn't feel overwhelming anymore. They felt organized. Defined. Trackable. I opened a new column in the spreadsheet. Verified, unverified, fabricated. The florist contract went into the last one. Then I went back through everything Daniel had flagged and started reclassifying. It took most of the afternoon. By the time I was done, the picture was clearer than it had ever been. Not just where the money went, but how, and when, and why. My phone buzzed. Vanessa. I let it ring once before answering. Did you see the contract? She asked. I did, and I'm reviewing it, I said. A beat. That's it, she pressed. No questions this time. Not right now. Another pause. That's New, she said. I told you I'd review it. She didn't sound convinced, but she didn't push. Good, she said finally, because we're finalizing a few more things tomorrow. I'll send them over. Okay. We hung up. I set the phone down slowly. She thought I'd backed off, that I'd finally stopped asking questions, which meant she was going to keep going, exactly the way she had been. That night, Daniel sent me an updated report. This one wasn't just numbers. It was a timeline. Each transaction aligned with a decision point, each fabricated document tied to a conversation, each transfer connected to a moment when I'd either hesitated or asked too many questions. It was all there. Clear, simple, unavoidable. At the bottom of the report, he added a note. If presented correctly, this is not just mismanagement. It demonstrates intentional misrepresentation for financial gain. I read it twice. Then I closed the file, not because I didn't believe it, but because I already did. The next morning, I woke up to 3 new invoices in my inbox: lighting upgrade, transportation adjustment, final coordination fee, all labeled urgent, all needing approval, all structured the same way as the others. I didn't open them right away. Instead, I made coffee and sat by the window letting the quiet settle in. 2 weeks ago, I was reacting. Now I was observing. And observation changes everything. I opened the first invoice. Same formatting inconsistencies. Second one. Same vague descriptions. Third one. A new name. Different account. But the same pattern. I added them to the spreadsheet. Unverified. Then I paused. Not because I was unsure, but because I realized something I hadn't considered before. If Vanessa had built this system, she wasn't just trying to cover expenses. She was trying to control perception of herself, of her life, of what this wedding represented. And that meant the money wasn't the only thing at stake. I looked at the calendar. Rehearsal dinner in 4 days. Wedding in 5. I closed the spreadsheet, picked up my phone, and texted Daniel. Be available the night of the wedding. He replied almost instantly. I will be. I stared at the message for a moment, then locked my screen. Because whatever was going to happen, it wasn't going to happen in private. The rehearsal dinner was held at a private restaurant overlooking the water. Everything about it was controlled lighting, seating, timing. Even the way people moved felt rehearsed, like everyone understood their role and stayed inside it. Vanessa looked exactly the way she wanted to be seen. Calm, radiant, effortless. If I didn't know what I knew, I might have believed it too. She hugged guests as they arrived, laughing in a way that carried just enough to draw attention. Ethan stayed close, smiling when expected, nodding when spoken to. From the outside, they looked aligned. From where I was sitting, they looked coordinated. I took a seat near the edge of the long table, close enough to observe, but far enough not to be pulled into every conversation. Mom was across from me, already talking about the ceremony schedule. Dad was at the head of the table, occasionally raising his glass like he was hosting something more formal than dinner. No one mentioned money. No one mentioned tension. It was like the past few weeks hadn't happened. Vanessa eventually sat beside me, smoothing her dress as she leaned in. I'm glad you came, she said, her voice low. I said I would. She studied my face for a second, like she was trying to read something that wasn't there. You've been quiet, she added. I've been listening. That's new. I didn't respond to that. Dinner started. Courses came and went. Conversations overlapped. At some point, I excused myself and stepped outside. The air was cooler near the water. quieter. I leaned against the railing and checked my phone mostly out of habit. That's when I heard voices behind me. Vanessa's. And Ethan's. I didn't turn around. You said it was handled. Ethan was saying, his voice lower than usual. It is, Vanessa replied. I told you I've got it under control. That's not what it looks like, he said. She's asking questions. She always asks questions, Vanessa said. That's how she feels important. There was a pause. And the transfers Ethan pressed. You said those were covered. They are. How? Another pause. Then Vanessa said, after the wedding, we'll settle everything. Once the gifts come in, once things normalize. That's not a plan, he cut in. That's a delay. It's enough, she snapped quietly. You knew what this was when you agreed. I knew you needed help, he said. I didn't know it was this much. I felt something tighten in my chest, but I stayed still, silent, listening. Vanessa's voice softened, but not in a way that felt genuine. It felt controlled. I just need this to look right, she said. Just this once. After that, we can fix everything. And if she finds out Ethan asked? She won't, Vanessa said immediately. I almost laughed. Not out loud, just internally at the certainty in her voice, because she wasn't wrong. Not yet. Ethan exhaled. I don't like this. You don't have to like it, she said. You just have to stay with me on it. There was a long silence, then footsteps. They moved past me without noticing I was there, the door closing behind them as they went back inside. I stayed where I was for a few seconds longer, not processing, not reacting, just confirming. Everything Daniel had mapped, everything I had suspected, it wasn't just numbers, it was intention. I went back inside. Vanessa caught my eye almost immediately, like she'd been checking whether I'd return. I walked back to my seat, picked up my glass, and took a sip. You okay? She asked. I'm fine. You look different. I'm just tired. She held my gaze for a moment longer than usual. Then she smiled again, bright, practiced, effortless. Almost there, she said. Just a few more days. Yeah, I replied. Almost. The rest of the night passed without incident. Speeches were made, laughter came at the right moments, glasses clinked. If there were cracks, they were invisible to anyone who wasn't looking for them. But I was, and now I knew exactly where to look. When the dinner ended, I left early. Not abruptly, not dramatically, just enough to avoid the after conversations that tend to drift into things people don't mean to say. In the car, I didn't turn on the radio. I just drove. Back to the hotel, back to quiet, back to a space where I could think without interruption. Once inside, I took off my shoes, sat at the desk, and opened my laptop. The spreadsheet loaded instantly. Columns, rows, notes. I added a new entry. Rehearsal dinner. Verbal confirmation. No numbers. Just context. After the wedding, we'll settle everything. I typed it exactly as she'd said it. Then Ethan's line. That's not a plan. That's a delay. I saved the file, closed it, and sat there for a moment letting the weight of it settle, not as emotion but as fact. Because that's what it was now. Not suspicion. Not interpretation. Fact. My phone buzzed. A message from Vanessa. Did you leave already? I stared at it for a second, then replied, Yeah. Early morning tomorrow. 3 dots appeared, then disappeared. Then came her response. Big day soon. Let's just enjoy it. Okay. I looked at the screen, at the word enjoy. Then I typed back, "Of course." I set the phone down and leaned back in my chair. Enjoy wasn't the word I would have used, but I understood what she meant. Keep it smooth. Keep it quiet. Keep it contained. And I would, until it wasn't. The morning of the wedding started earlier than I expected, not because of nerves, because of emails. 3 new ones had come in overnight, all marked urgent, all from Chloe. Final lighting adjustment, transportation reallocation, day of coordination balance. Each one came with a number. No attachments, no contracts, just totals. I didn't open them right away. Instead, I made coffee in the hotel room and sat by the window watching the vineyard outside slowly come to life. Staff moving between rows, chairs being arranged in neat lines, a structure taking shape. It looked flawless from a distance. Most things do. My laptop sat open on the desk behind me. The spreadsheet was still there exactly where I'd left it the night before. Structured, documented, clear. That was the difference now. Nothing about this felt chaotic anymore. It felt organized. I turned back, walked over, and opened the first email. Lighting adjustment $7,200. No breakdown. Second email. Transportation $4,600. Still no documentation. Third. Coordination balance $3,900. Same format. Same pattern. I didn't need Daniel to confirm what these were. I added each one to the spreadsheet. Unverified. Then I opened the timeline. Every time I had stopped asking questions, the amounts increased. Every time I pushed, the documentation became thinner. And now the morning of the wedding, the largest final charges had no documentation at all. It wasn't just a system. It was escalation. My phone buzzed. Daniel. Available, his message read. I typed back. Keep your phone on. I'll text when. No questions from him. Just a response. Understood. I closed the chat and looked at the time. 4 hours until the ceremony. 6 until the reception. Enough time for everything to unfold exactly the way Vanessa expected. And then not. I got dressed slowly. Not because I was unsure, because I didn't want to rush into something that required precision. A navy dress. Simple. Structured. Nothing that drew attention. I tied my hair back, kept my makeup minimal. I didn't want to look like the center of anything. I wanted to look like someone who belonged there, which I did. Just not in the way Vanessa thought. By the time I arrived at the venue, everything was in motion. Staff moving quickly, vendors adjusting details, guests beginning to gather. Vanessa was in a private room getting ready. Mom spotted me first. "You're here," she said, relief obvious in her voice. "I said I would be." She studied my face, searching for something. "You okay?" she asked. "I'm fine. You've been distant. I've been busy." She nodded but didn't look convinced. "This is important to her," she said quietly. "Today needs to go smoothly." "I know. And whatever's been going on, it's handled," I said. That seemed to settle her, at least for the moment. "Good," she said. "That's all I wanted to hear." Dad joined us a few minutes later, adjusting his tie. "Everything under control?" he asked. "Yes," I said. He nodded, satisfied. They both were. Because control to them meant silence, not accuracy, not truth. Just no disruption. I excused myself and walked toward the back of the venue where the staff area was set up. Chloe was there, clipboard in hand, moving between people like she was directing traffic. When she saw me, she smiled. "Lillian," she said. "Big day." "It is. We just need to finalize a few things," she added, already pulling up something on her tablet. I saw the emails I said. "Great," she replied. "If you can approve those, we'll be fully aligned. I'll need the contracts first." Her smile didn't disappear. It adjusted. "We don't have time for that today," she said lightly. "Everything's already in place. Then it should already be documented." "It is," she said. "Just not in a format we can resend right now." I held her gaze. "That's not how documentation works." She exhaled just slightly. "Lillian," she said, lowering her voice, "today isn't the day to get into details." "No," I replied. "It's the day everything gets finalized." There was a brief pause. Then she leaned in a little closer. "Vanessa trusted you to support this," she said. "Not to slow it down." "I am supporting it," I said, "by making sure it's real." Her expression shifted. Not defensive. Measured. Like she was recalculating. "Everything is real," she said. "Then send me the documentation." I replied. Silence. Just for a second. But enough. Because in that second, she didn't have an answer. Not one she could say out loud. "I'll see what I can do," she said finally. I nodded. "That would be helpful." I walked away before she could respond. Not because I was done, but because I didn't need anything else from her right now. I already had what I needed. I stepped outside toward the ceremony area. Rows of chairs were perfectly aligned. White fabric, clean lines, soft light. Guests were beginning to take their seats. From the outside, everything looked exactly the way Vanessa wanted it to. Perfect. Complete. Unquestioned. I checked my phone. One new message. From Vanessa. "Where are you?" I typed back. "Outside." "Everything looks great." A few seconds later, she replied, "Thank you. For everything." I stared at the message. At the words. For everything. Then I locked my phone and slipped it into my bag, because in a few hours, everything was going to mean something very different. By the time the reception started, the sun had already dipped behind the hills. From the outside, everything had gone exactly as planned. The ceremony was smooth. The vows were polished. Vanessa looked composed, almost serene. Ethan stayed close steady, saying all the right things at the right moments. If there were cracks, no one saw them. Or maybe they did and chose not to. That's what people do when something looks expensive enough. They don't question it. They admire it. The ballroom lights came up slowly as guests found their seats. Music settled into the background. Glassware caught the glow of the chandeliers. Vanessa stood near the center greeting people, her hand resting lightly on Ethan's arm. Control. That was the word that kept coming back to me. Not chaos. Not desperation. Control. I stayed at my table until the first round of toasts began. Dad went first, speaking about family, about sacrifice, about how proud he was of both of us. He didn't look at me when he said that. Mom followed, softer, emotional, focused entirely on Vanessa, then Ethan's best man, then a friend of Vanessa's. Each speech layered another version of the same story. Everything had come together. Everything had been worth it. Everything was exactly as it should be. When the final toast ended, there was a brief pause. That was when Daniel stepped forward. He wasn't dressed like a guest. Not entirely. Dark suit, no tie. Professional but neutral. Not part of the celebration. Part of something else. "I'm sorry to interrupt," he said, his voice carrying just enough to cut through the room without forcing it. A few heads turned. Then more. Vanessa's smile didn't drop immediately. It held, like she was deciding whether this was something she could absorb or something she needed to stop. "Daniel," she said lightly, "now's not really." "It won't take long," he replied. That was enough to shift the room. People stopped talking. Not completely, but enough to listen. I stood then, not quickly, not dramatically, just deliberately. Vanessa's eyes moved to me, and for the first time that night her expression changed. Not panic, recognition, because she understood something in that moment. Not everything, but enough. "Lillian," she said, her voice quieter now. "What is this?" I didn't answer her directly. I looked at Daniel. He nodded once, then opened the folder in his hands. "This isn't about disrupting your wedding," he said. "It's about clarifying how it was funded." The word funded landed harder than anything emotional would have, because it sounded objective, neutral, unavoidable. "This event," he continued, "has been presented as a $75,000 wedding, but a significant portion of those funds were not used for the services they were allocated to." A few people shifted in their seats. Someone near the back let out a small, uncertain laugh. Vanessa stepped forward. "That's not appropriate," she said, her tone tightening. "We can talk about this later." Daniel didn't look at her. He kept his focus on the room. Over the past 6 months, payments were made under the assumption they were tied to vendors and contracted services. However, he turned a page. Many of those payments cannot be verified. Now the room went quiet. Not polite quiet. Listening quiet. "What do you mean, cannot be verified?" someone asked. Daniel didn't rush. "It means there is no contract, no registered business, or no corresponding service tied to the payment." Vanessa's voice cut in sharper now. "That's not true." Daniel finally looked at her. "Then we can review them together," he said evenly. He lifted the first page. "Florist upgrade, $6,800. Vanessa didn't respond. "We contacted the company listed on the contract," Daniel continued. "They have no record of providing services under that name." A ripple moved through the room, small, but visible. There must be a mistake," Vanessa said. Daniel turned another page. "Lighting adjustment, $7,200. Vendor not registered. No contract on file." Another page. "Transportation reallocation, $4,600. Payment sent to a personal account." Vanessa stepped closer now, her voice lower but more intense. "Stop," she said. Daniel didn't. Total unverified or misrepresented funds, $52,000. That number didn't just land. It echoed, because people could understand it. More than half. More than half of what had been spent. Vanessa's composure finally broke. "Okay," she said quickly. "Fine. It's not perfect. Things got messy. That happens with weddings." "No," Daniel said calmly. "This isn't disorganization." He paused just long enough for the distinction to register. "This is structured misrepresentation." Silence. Vanessa looked at me then. Not at Daniel. Not at the room. At me. "You did this?" she asked. I held her gaze. "I verified it," I said. Her expression shifted again. Not anger. Not yet. Something closer to exposure. "You could have talked to me," she said. "I did," I replied. "Multiple times." "That's not the same as this," she said, gesturing around the room. "No," I agreed. "It's not." Another pause. Then softer, almost breaking, "I was going to fix it," she said. The room didn't react to that immediately. They waited, because that wasn't an explanation, just a statement. "I just needed time," she continued. "After the wedding, once everything's settled." "That's not how money works," someone said quietly from a nearby table. Vanessa's shoulders dropped slightly. "Just enough." "It wasn't just the wedding," she said finally, and there it was. Not denial, not deflection. The beginning of truth. "I had debts." She continued, her voice no longer controlled. "Things I couldn't keep up with. Credit cards, loans. I thought I could handle it, but it kept building." She glanced at Ethan. He didn't move. "I needed this to look right," she said. "Just once. Just one moment where everything wasn't falling apart." The room didn't interrupt her. They listened, because now it made sense. Not acceptable, but understandable. "I thought if I could get through today," she said, "I could fix everything after." I watched her carefully. Not for the emotion, for the structure. Because even now, she was still explaining the intention, not the impact. Daniel closed the folder. He didn't need to say anything else. Everything that mattered had already been said. Vanessa looked at me again. "You didn't have to do it like this," she said. "I considered that." Then answered honestly. "Yes," I said. "I did. Because private conversations hadn't worked. Because questions had been avoided. Because documentation had been fabricated. Because the only place left for truth was where it couldn't be redirected. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was final. Fan moi. The rest of the night didn't collapse the way people might expect. There was no shouting, no dramatic exits. Just a shift. The music stopped for a while. Conversations broke into smaller circles. Some guests stayed seated, unsure whether to leave or pretend nothing had happened. Others quietly stepped outside, giving the room space it didn't know how to hold. Vanessa didn't run. She stood there still in her wedding dress, still at the center of everything she had tried to control, only now there was nothing left to manage. Ethan moved first. Not toward her. Away. It wasn't sudden. It was deliberate. He said something to his best man, then walked toward the back of the room without looking at anyone else. Vanessa watched him go, but she didn't call after him. That told me more than anything he could have said. My parents approached her next. Mom reached for her hand. "Vanessa." "It's fine," Vanessa said quietly. It wasn't defensive anymore. It wasn't controlled. It was empty. Dad didn't speak right away. He looked at me once, then back at her. How much, he asked. Not why, not how. Just how much. Vanessa swallowed. "I don't know the exact number," she said, "but most of it." Dad nodded slowly, like he was filing that away for later. Mom's voice softened again. "We'll figure this out." Vanessa shook her head. "No," she said. "That's the problem." I kept thinking that. Silence settled between them. Not tension this time. Recognition. I didn't step into that space. Not yet. Instead, I walked toward Daniel. He closed the folder as I approached, like the work was done. "You okay?" he asked. "I am," I said. "You want me to stay?" "For a bit," I replied. "Then you can go." He nodded. We stood there for a moment, watching the room reorganize itself around something no one had planned for. Eventually, Vanessa turned and walked toward me. Slowly. Not as a confrontation, as something else. I guess this is the part where I say, "I'm sorry," she said. Her voice was steady again. Not controlled, just clear. "You can say whatever you want," I replied. She looked down briefly, then back up. "I didn't start this to take advantage of you," she said. "I started it because I couldn't keep up, and once I realized I couldn't, I didn't know how to stop without everything falling apart." I listened, not interrupting, not correcting. "I told myself it was temporary," she continued, "that I'd fix it before anyone noticed. But every time I got close, there was something else. Another bill, another expectation." She let out a small breath. "And then it wasn't temporary anymore." I nodded once. I figured that. She almost smiled at that. "Of course you did," she said. "You always do." There was no bitterness in it this time, just acknowledgement. "I'm not going to ask you to forgive me," she added. "I don't think that's something I get to ask for right now." "That's fair," I said. Another pause. "Then I'll pay you back," she said. "Not all at once, but I will." "I'm sure you will," I replied. She studied my face like she was waiting for something else. An offer, a solution, a way back to what we had before. I didn't give her one. Instead, I said, "That's between you and your finances." Her expression shifted slightly, not hurt, understanding. "So that's it?" she asked. "We just go back to being strangers who share a last name?" "No," I said. She waited. "We don't go back," I continued. "That's not an option." Then what I thought about that for a second. About everything that had led here, about the choices she made, and the ones I made in response. "We move forward," I said, "but not the same way." She nodded slowly. "That makes sense." It did, because this wasn't about punishment. It wasn't about winning. It was about structure, boundaries, clarity, things that don't depend on emotion to exist. "I'm not going to take legal action," I added. Her eyes lifted slightly at that. "But I'm also not going to fund anything else," I continued. "No more shared accounts. No more open-ended support." She didn't argue. She didn't negotiate. She just nodded again. "I understand." And for the first time in months, I believed her. Not because she said the right thing, but because she didn't try to change it. We stood there for a moment longer, then she stepped back. Not away from me, just out of the space we had been standing in, like she understood that it belonged to something else now, something finished. Daniel came over a few minutes later. "I'm heading out," he said. "Thank you," I replied. He gave a small nod. "You handled that well." "I handled it clearly," I said. "That's usually the same thing," he replied. After he left, I stayed a little longer. Not for Vanessa, not for my parents, for myself. To let the moment settle into something that didn't need to be revisited. Eventually, I walked out into the night. The air was cooler now, quieter. The kind of quiet that doesn't ask anything from you. I didn't check my phone. I didn't look back. Because for the first time since this started, there was nothing left to figure out. Just something to live with, and something to carry forward differently. Some stories don't end with everything repaired. They end with everything understood. And sometimes that matters more. If you've ever been in a position where helping someone slowly turned into being taken advantage of, you probably know how hard it is to recognize the moment where support becomes obligation, and obligation becomes something else entirely. What I learned is that boundaries aren't punishment. They're structure. They don't erase what happened, and they don't guarantee that relationships will stay the same. But they make it possible to move forward without repeating the same pattern. Forgiveness, if it comes, doesn't have to mean access. It doesn't have to mean trust is restored the way it was before. It just means you've decided not to carry the weight in the same way. If any part of this resonates with you, I'd really like to hear your perspective, where you're watching, from what time it is there, and whether you've ever had to draw a line with someone close to you. And if you want more stories like this, realistic, reflective, and grounded in choices people actually face, you're always welcome to stay and subscribe. This is a fictional story created for entertainment, education, and reflection.